Bene, buonasera, ci vuole un applauso. Qua dietro nascosto, Jonathan, I would like to invite you just say hello, applaudiamolo perché devo dirvi che Jonathan Woetzel, poi dopo lo richiamiamo, è qui con noi, è venuto apposta per questo appuntamento con Milano e con voi da Shanghai. Allora, prima di dare la parola a lui, lasciatemi dire un po' di cose. Ovviamente che sono felice di rivedervi qua, sono felice di essere qui a Base, è la prima sperimentazione di Meet Media Guru qui a Base in un contesto completamente diverso, che ci piacerà la prossima volta se ci faremo ancora un'altra edizione, come spero, trasformarlo come loro usualmente usano come un salotto, quindi con poltrone, divanetti, ne parlavo prima con Daniela. Grazie per l'ospitalità a Base, veramente stanno facendo un grande lavoro, è un grande momento così di accoglienza. Lasciatemi dire ancora due cose, un applauso se lo meritano anche loro, coraggio. Perché ci riscaldiamo, grazie. Sapete che è un progetto su cui puntiamo tutti quanti noi cittadini di Milano, quindi siamo felici davvero di essere qui. Un'altra cosa ancora, perché poi mi dimentico, mi sgridano, o avete visto l'hashtag Future Ways, quindi come avete sentito nella sigla d'apertura, non spengete i cellulari. Quindi commentate, dite la vostra, fate foto, fate quello che volete. L'importante è che voi siate parte integrante di questa serata, di questo momento di incontro. Qui vedete un giornale che penso e spero che abbiate preso tutti quanti. Questo progetto, questa è la terza puntata, la serata stasera con Jonathan Woetzel, è la terza puntata di un ciclo di incontri che con la Triennale di Milano, grazie alla Triennale di Milano e per la 21esima edizione di Milano, tutto in giallo come vedete, abbiamo realizzato proprio per entrare nel design after design, quindi nelle riflessioni che riguardano il futuro della nostra società, il futuro dell'ambiente, il futuro in particolare stasera entreremo proprio sul tema dell'after city. E a proposito di after city, quindi le città che vedremo hanno oggi dei problemi ma che stanno già risolvendo, come in Cina, una serie di questioni molto importanti come appunto la sostenibilità, l'inquinamento, l'ambiente eccetera. E noi abbiamo creato appunto un ciclo di incontri con 5 personaggi di tutto rispetto e questo giornalone che vedete avrete ricevuto un bollino, mi raccomando non perdetelo perché c'è la raccolta dei punti. Ho detto va bene, per una volta facciamo anche noi queste cose che magari sono simpatiche, anche perché ci tengo tanto alla fine ad accogliervi ovviamente più i fedeli, però non solo, insomma vedremo perché non sono capace di dare premi o robe del genere, però ci farebbe molto piacere omaggiarvi di questi libretti, piccoli libri che abbiamo prodotto insieme a IGEA sulla cultura digitale, si intitolano proprio a tu per tu con la cultura digitale. Quindi raccolta punti, 3 punti, 5 punti, dipende da quanti ne raccogliete, quanto seguite questo programma che è modulare, ma al tempo stesso se avete voglia di seguirlo tutto uscirete che saprete tutto di come sta andando veramente il mondo, perché Future Ways of Living, che realizziamo anche con l'Istituto Without Boundary George Brown College di Toronto, cioè questo programmone, e che poi insomma, è un programma che ci porta in parti diverse del mondo. Abbiamo già ascoltato Taccara che ci ha parlato di progetti diciamo, con una visione a 360 gradi delle tendenze di social innovation applicate proprio al tema dell'ambiente eccetera. Rita, in realtà Mugendi, mi piace più il suo nome, è più facile per me pronunciarlo, e arriva dall'Africa e ci ha descritto un continente che tutt'altro appiattito sui luoghi comuni del continente povero, che aspetta altro che i nostri sostegni e aiuti, si sta muovendo e sta facendo delle cose estremamente interessanti. Woetzel stasera ci porterà in Cina con Luigi Ferrara, che vedete scritto qui, nome italianissimo ma canadese di nascita, ovviamente genitori italiani, ci farà entrare dentro un mondo molto particolare che è quello della co-partecipazione, della co-creation, e quindi al Museo della Scienza e della Tecnica avremo lui che ci porterà esempi provenienti da tutto il mondo, cosa vuol dire il design oggi, e non un design solo, per carità, meno male che ci sono le furniture belle come queste qui che stanno disegnando Base, quindi ci sono ovviamente prodotti, ma c'è anche un design dei servizi, un design sociale, un design cioè come progettazione, la capacità, una sorta di scienza se vogliamo, o capacità che possiamo mettere in pratica tutti quanti noi per trovare soluzioni ai vari problemi, alle varie questioni aperte oggi sulla nostra contemporaneità e il nostro futuro. E questo è molto importante perché poi, visto dalla parte di Mediaguro, voglio sottolineare l'altro aspetto, che quello che ci interessa anche capire è l'impatto delle tecnologie, o che cosa ne facciamo di queste tecnologie che oggi abbiamo, e sono ovviamente tecnologie abilitanti, e a noi ci interessa capire come, dove possiamo usarle, piegarle alle nostre necessità e dove effettivamente ci possono permettere veramente di sviluppare percorsi nuovi e trovare soluzioni inedite. E questo è il modo con cui Mediaguro vuole parlare insieme a voi, insieme ai nostri ospiti, eccetera, di quello che sta succedendo oggi, come possiamo prepararci, a che cosa dobbiamo pensare, come vogliamo guardare e non subire soltanto le tecnologie, soprattutto la rete, i social, tutto quanto, come qualcosa che ci sovrasta, ci domina e non riusciamo a controllare più di tanto. Quindi Mediaguro insomma cerca insieme a queste persone, a tutti quanti voi e noi, di trovare semplicemente di ritrovare uno sguardo, se volete, uno sguardo diverso, che sia lontano dai luoghi comuni, che ci permette di trovare una curiosità in noi e di leggere gli eventi e gli avvenimenti del mondo anche in una maniera più preparata, in una maniera più originale. Finisco e quindi penso di aver detto tutto. Ovviamente ringrazio i nostri partner, prima di tutto ovviamente la Triennale che ci ha permesso di costruire questo percorso così interessante, e non lo dovrei dire io, lo dovrete dire voi, ma che vedo persone che hanno già partecipato alla prima, alla seconda, quindi sono al terzo bollino. e ringrazio poi in particolare i nostri partner, perché Mediaguro è un progetto no profit che, come vedete, è aperto, perché il tema della cultura digitale, quindi dell'attenzione a questi grandi cambiamenti in atto, ci preme particolarmente portarli avanti e che siano intergenerazionali. Tra l'altro siamo tutti, come dico semplicemente, sulla stessa barca, quindi non ci sono più specialisti di altri. Questo mondo bisogna che tutti quanti siamo ben allertati e guardiamo bene cosa sta succedendo alla nostra società in trasformazione. Allora ringrazio Artemide, che è illuminante azienda, non a caso ci ha illuminato, ci aiuta su questo percorso di illuminazione. Ringrazio Fastweb, ringrazio il Comune di Milano, perché comunque anche Base è un progetto del Comune di Milano. Ringrazio la Fondazione Fiera di Milano, con la quale stiamo portando avanti da anni dei processi interessanti di innovazione anche nel mondo degli organizzatori e comunicatori di fiere, e poi anche la Fondazione Caripo che ci patrocina, perché comunque il nostro patrocina, perché è un lavoro che pensiamo veramente di creare a sostegno proprio di una maggiore coscienza sociale, di un tentativo, insomma, tutti quanti, se vogliamo, di vivere meglio. E per vivere meglio bisogna stare in processi di consapevolezza. Quindi io penso di aver detto tutto. Ho dimenticato qualcosa perché c'è Lorenza che mi guarda. Ringrazio, ovviamente là c'è una squadra di team al lavoro, di redazione live, e quindi i vostri Twitter, i vostri incoraggiamenti, ma anche le vostre critiche, quello che volete, saranno accolti, commentati, distribuiti e quant'altro. Lorenza, Nicola, Sara, eccetera, un team straordinario. Claudio, che con me è un regista che va da 20 anni, quindi mi sopporta in tutte le mie variazioni e adesso io non tolgo altro tempo. Volevo solo suggerirvi una cosa, spero di essere andata veloce e di non avervi annoiato, di non perdere alcune mostre che è Design After Design, e ringrazio Andrea Cancellato per questo sforzo enorme che ha fatto nella città di Milano. Ci sono in giro delle mostre straordinarie, una in particolare che mi sento di suggerire, se mi permettete, si chiama Neopreistoria. Se volete capire un po' la nostra evoluzione, il rapporto alle tecnologie, il rapporto ai nostri bisogni, alla risposta ai nostri bisogni, dalla preistoria ad oggi. Andate alla Triennale di Milano e guardate questa mostra di Branzi e Ara, che tra l'altro saranno un extra il 18, se voi non andate in vacanza, quindi sabato prossimo alle 11:30 abbiamo deciso di organizzare così molto rapidamente un incontro con Ara e Branzi, traduzione, c'è poi un light lunch e la visita alla mostra, e vi aspettiamo in Triennale, quindi alle 11:30 del 18, che è un sabato mattina. Chi viene non perde, cioè, voglio dire, se venite non ve ne pentirete, perché è una mostra straordinaria. Comunque andate a vedere la mostra. E l'altro appuntamento che voglio invece ricordare è che nell'area Expo, io sono andata domenica, ci sono 6 mostre, in realtà secondo me una mostra unica, City After City, che si lega benissimo, lo legheremo molto al discorso che stasera Jonathan ci racconterà, al racconto di Jonathan, ed è tutta dedicata proprio, è una mostra molto particolare, molto multimediale, vale assolutamente la pena di vederla, suggestiva, dà veramente una serie di input e di spunti interessanti per riflettere sul nostro abitare oggi visto in prospettiva in futuro. Ci sono degli sguardi e delle prospettive narrate in quel percorso espositivo straordinari, quindi mi sento di poterveli consigliare veramente col cuore. Adesso finisco la mia introduzione, perché la serata è con la Cina raccontata da John. Prego Jonathan, vieni qua, ve lo introduco. Jonathan, please, come here. Ok, un applauso a lui. Jonathan adesso ci parlerà, preparatevi, peggio per noi, in cinese. Lui parla perfettamente il mandarino, da 20 anni vive in Cina, è un personaggio di origine, cioè è un personaggio assolutamente straordinario, ma non lo devo dire io, lo direte poi voi. Vive dall'85 in Cina, quindi adesso la Cina è vicina, nell'85 non era proprio così vicina. Va bene. Dirige, ha fondato, anzi è stato mandato lì in Cina nell'85 a fondare l'area asiatica di McKinsey & Company. Dirige il McKinsey Global Institute, una divisione incaricata della ricerca economica della multinazionale, la sua formazione è economista. È presidente poi, così l'ho scoperto, grazie a un amico che ringrazio, spero che sia in collegamento con noi da Shanghai, Michele Travierzo, che è un giornalista che vive a Shanghai e ci ha suggerito questo incontro. Chi? Ah sì, c'è un gradino. Ah sì, c'è un gradino, se ho paura che mi muova e che inciampi. Vabbè, cerco di autoeliminarmi, no? Allora, dicevo, lui ha creato un think tank. Come? Ah, e devo salire sul gradino. Ah, non che devo attenta al gradino. Pensavo che tu ti preoccupassi per me. Va bene, grazie. Allora, grazie Lorenza. Ha creato questo think tank molto no profit, Urban China Initiative, un progetto co-creato con un'università americana, la Columbia, un'università cinese che non so come si chiama, Tsinghua, e dalla stessa McKinsey, per trovare soluzioni alle sfide dell'urbanizzazione che la Cina ha davanti. È autore di 5 libri, tutti dedicati al gigante cinese, ed è docente alla scuola di business della Jiao Tong University. Si voleva, non a caso viene il nostro ospite dalla Cina. Quindi con questo profilo io lascio la parola a Jonathan, che ringrazio ancora una volta per essere venuto solo qua per questo appuntamento con noi. Grazie.
Mille grazie Maria Grazia, and mille grazie Milano. So pleasure to be here today. My Italian will not take me further than this. But I'm so happy to have the chance to come to the first place in Europe that learned about China and had a great impact on China. The only foreign mayor of a Chinese city was an Italian, of course, Marco Polo. The only counselor to an emperor of China was an Italian. It was Matteo Ricci. So here we are again, 500 years later, to talk about China. My story is about China, but it is also about cities. And so we title this, How to Change a Billion People, which is the great experiment that China is undertaking now. Deng Xiaoping said, we will do something that has not been written about in books. We do not know how this will go, but we will try anyway. And that's what China has been doing. So I'm going to talk a bit about that and how it's happened and what it means. But first, a quiz. I'm the only one wearing a tie here, I think. I feel like I can ask you sort of tough questions. Which country is China? Country A, country B, country C, country D. We have 4 countries. Look at these countries. Inflation, low to high. Research and development, high to low. Demographics, old to young. Life expectancy, long to short. Where is China? Okay, everybody who says country A, raise your hand. Nobody for A. How about for B? Some hands. I see some hands. C. Who's going to do C? More hands. And D. More hands. See, we have many different views. Oh, D. Oh, my gosh. So, survey says C. China is C. All you in C, take a bow. Very good. B, that's Italy. As you can see, China is actually a lot closer to Italy than it is to India. So why do we call China a developing country when it already starts to look like so-called developed countries? What is China anyway? So I'm going to try to do this in a myths and realities kind of conversation. And I've already talked about the first one. There's a myth that China is a developing country. The reality is China is both a developing and a developed country. China has easily 300-400 million people who would look just like anybody in a developed country. But China also has 700-800 million people who look like a developing country. So which one is it? So some people look at China and they say, well, they still, China, this is been so fast, it is just somehow going to be over like that. It's a flash in the pan. It's quickly, it will collapse. There's a book called The Coming Collapse of China. This book was published in 1988. It is still on sale in airport bookstores. You can buy this book. So maybe it will collapse. Our view, my view, is that this, what you see today, is not something that happened right away. This took a long time to get there. This took hundreds of years to get to where we are now, and it's not going to change that fast. Those forces, those are long forces. But is it a good thing? China doesn't care. It's dirty. It hurts people. It abuses human rights. It's a horrible country. I've heard a lot. No one wants to live in a dirty, unsafe place. That is not what the Chinese people want. And what is happening now is we are starting to see a change in the way society, government, business addresses the challenge of being in the city. It might have been good enough before to just have a job, but now we want a clean job, and we want a safe job, and we want a job where we can have families that go to school without worrying about whether the building will fall down in the morning. It's in the middle of this transition. But isn't it just about government? And China's government can do it all. China's government is strong. China's government has a lot of implementation. Well, yes, China's government has done a lot to get it where it is today, but actually the way China works is very much from the bottom up. The government can't force things to happen. It can stop things from happening, or it can try, but it can't force people to do something that they don't want to do. And what we see now is the change in the way people are behaving to encourage both civil society and private sector to do more, to organize themselves, and to create alternatives. And finally, maybe China is just unique. Maybe China is just by itself. Nothing can be explained by China. Well, actually, not so much. In fact, we start to see what is happening in China become a global phenomenon, whether it's in Africa or the Middle East or India or South Asia or even North America. We're starting to see the products, the services, and even the way of thinking that China's urbanization has represented go global. And that perhaps is where we should start our conversation, is what is the implication of all of this for all of us? But let me start with the step back. This is not a new story. This is a very long-term story. For thousands and thousands of years, literally, China and India were the center of the world economy. When you wanted to look at where people were inventing things, when you wanted to see where the most powerful armies were, when you wanted to see where the most important cultural events were, you had to go to China and India. And then after a while, up into this, somehow, something started to go wrong in the 1700s, and then it all went downhill, and now maybe we're on our way back. When I show this chart to people, for example, in the US Defense Department, they ask me this question. They don't ask, is this chart right? What they ask is, does China think this chart is right? And the answer to that is pretty much, yeah. This is where it's going. This is the idea, that China will go back to being where it was, 25% of the world economy, which also means 25% of the world's consumers, and of its companies, and of its technology, and of its resources. And if that's your mindset, if that's where you're going back to, you take a long-term view on how to get there, and you do things to invest to get there. So this is a very long story. Now, how is this happening? Winston Churchill had a great line. Our friend Winston here. Why does this English person show up all of a sudden? He said, "We shape our buildings, and then our buildings shape us. We shape our buildings, and then our buildings shape us. We create this environment, and this environment changes us." And that is how China has figured this out. It has realized there is a magic, and it's a science, actually, not a magic, a science to how to become better, stronger, more capable. And that magic is called urbanization. Give an example or two. First of all, there are no rich countries which aren't urban. All rich countries are urban. And as we become more urban, we can become richer. Now, it is also true that there are urban countries which are not rich. So we can mess this up. You can have bad cities. But it does seem to be necessary to become a city's country if you want to become a rich country. So how does this work in the actuality? Here's a map, and I'm sorry, but hopefully everybody can see from the lights here. This is where economic activity was 2,000 years ago. The points of light represent that. So as you can see, there's a lot of light here, and there's a lot of light here, and there's some light over here. This is where all of the economic activity was 2,000 years ago. For 1,000 years, we had wars, we had the Crusades, we had the Roman Empire, and yet not much happened. Still, most of the lights here, a few more lights over here. Fast forward another 500 years. And what do we get? Still pretty much the same picture. And then something happens. People in Europe started to go from here to here. And when they did that, they doubled their income. They became more productive. They became specialized. Meanwhile, back in China, not much was happening. And so what happened was, from a map which looks like this in 1500, where you have lights here, here, and here, all roughly the same, a couple hundred years later, things start to look like this, where all of a sudden the lights are here, and now the lights are over here, and the lights have basically kind of gone out over here. That was the magic of urbanization. The lights literally came on somewhere else, and they went out in China and India. Now, I will skip forward a few decades and ask people, does anybody know what city this might be? It's not a trick question. It could be any city. It's any city in China. As it happens, it was Shenzhen. This same place, this was the picture in 1980. This is the picture today. What we have seen is a physical transformation. We have changed our buildings. In the city where I live, Shanghai, this is what Shanghai looked like in 1980. It had looked that way for many years. There's a joke between a Hong Kong person and a Shanghai person. Hong Kong person is worried about what will happen when the communists come to Hong Kong. The Shanghai people say, don't worry, nothing will change. And he comes to ask the Shanghai, how can you say that? Look what happened to Shanghai. I say, yeah, look what happened to Shanghai. Nothing changed. So this is what Shanghai looked like after 40 years of communist rule. And now this is what it looks like today. So there has been this magic, this change of our physical environment. And with that, we went from a map that looked like this to a map which looks like this. And as you can see, the lights are coming on over here, still have lights here. And if we project this further, what we get to is maps which look like this, and then ultimately like this. And so this is, you still have, of course, here and here, but now you have this huge glow, and now you start to see this over here, and over here as well. And so this urbanization is not just also a China story. It's a global story, and it's a story of how economic development follows the path of urbanization. So, how does this happen? And here I have to credit Geoffrey West. Geoffrey is a British scientist. He used to be a nuclear physicist and run the Santa Fe Institute. And he started to ask the question, what is the science of cities? What is this magic? Why does this happen? Why don't we understand the laws of the jungle? What are the laws of the city? And maybe these cities, they aren't just buildings. Maybe they're organisms. Maybe they're creatures. Maybe they have their own life. What are their laws? How do they behave? He came up with 3 really powerful points. First of all, cities are super linear. When you double the population of a city, you don't just get 2 times. You get 2.15 times. You get a little bit more. You get a little bit more of everything, of economics, of society, of crime, of invention, of traffic. We get more, and that's because cities are sharing. We share everything, and that allows us to do more. First observation. Second observation, cities systematically speed up. As they get bigger, they get faster. And I'll show you some wonderful charts on this, but I think we all know this. When you are in a big, important city, you walk faster because you have more to do. You have more people to see, more places to go. Second observation. And thirdly, it's not a straight line. Cities don't just go like that. Cities tend to go up and then down, and then up and then down. And that's natural. That is the pattern of growth that we see in cities globally. Because they're changing so fast, you have to find time to respond. And sometimes you don't have enough time, and then things go wrong, and then you respond. But the city is still there. Cities are the longest-lived organisms on the planet. They're the most complicated things human beings do. They are us. Here's a few facts. everything is connected to everything. Here we see a relationships between GDP, income, crime. As you can see, there's a straight line. When one thing grows, so does the other. We cannot separate the social, the environmental, the economic. They all go together. Rich places are nice places to live. Poor places are not. Bad environments drive people away. High crime rates make it unlikely that you will invest in the environment. Everything is related to itself. So this has to be, first point, is that the city can get higher growth as long as it considers everything. Secondly, biological life is different from social life. In biological life, as we get bigger, we get slower. We move slowly. But as a city gets bigger, people walk faster. So we should be careful about taking the analogy of the physical and applying it to the social. And in the social realm, more people creates more activity, not less. And finally, on the left-hand side, this is the population growth for New York. As you can see, it goes up. It looks like a straight line. What actually is happening is it's going up, and then it's going down. It's going up, and then it's going down. It's going up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And that's the normal pace of a city. There's always some up and then some down. And it's getting faster. So becoming comfortable with this high rate of change is also one of the implications of these laws of the city. I just thought I would like to share that because it shows that there is something going on here. There is something which you can measure and something which you can see how it grows. But let's talk about China. So where is China today? China is going to be very soon the world's largest economy. It will be bigger than the United States economy in a couple of years, depending on what you believe about exchange rates. And so clearly, China is now a huge, important factor, not just for itself, but for everybody else. We know roughly what China is going to look like. This is the map. Here you see the cities. This is roughly where the big cities are. They're up and down the coast, and then they're across the rivers, the river Yangtze, because you need water to build a city. So it's for life, but it's also for transport. And looking forward, you know, more or less the same picture. What's happening is China is filling in. We're not going to see another big 20 million person Chinese cities, but what we will see is maybe 20 Chinese clusters. And each cluster will be the size of a European country. So Shanghai, Greater Shanghai, France. Wuhan, Poland. Jing-Jing-Ji, Beijing, Tianjin, Germany. And altogether roughly the size of the European Union. So what we see here is the United States of China, or the Chinese Union, whichever way you would like to call it. Because China is not just a country, it's a continent. And it has the differences of a continent. Just as things are different from Helsinki to Greece, so too from Harbin to Sanya. So this is the outline of China is already becoming pretty clear in terms of how these cities are going to evolve. But something else is becoming pretty clear too, or maybe not so clear, that all this economic growth and all this development has also created some problems. This is a view on a reasonably bad day in Beijing from outside the window of our office. And you can see this beautiful building behind us, which is the Rem Koolhaas designed CCTV tower, affectionately known as the Big Pants. So things are obviously, that wasn't planned. Nobody planned that level of pollution. Here's another picture. I don't know, maybe some people have been to this building. Does anybody recognize this building? Yeah. That's right. This is the expo. This is the Chinese pavilion at the Shanghai Expo. And yes, today it is now actually an art museum, in fact, in Shanghai. But no, this is not actually the Chinese pavilion. What this is a picture of the Chinese demographic pyramid in the year 2030. As you can see, we have one child, we have two parents, we have four grandparents. And so what has happened is China's one-child policy has all of a sudden created an aging society, where over 1 out of 4 people will be over the age of 60 by the year 2040. 1 out of 4. China is one of the more rapidly aging societies on the planet. So there's another issue. So we have pollution and we have aging. We have people in the city who don't know what to do. This is a woman who came from the village. She wound up in this slum. She has a sign there saying that she is an expert at repairing clothes. And that's what she's doing. We have people who have been thrown into the city with no preparation, with no knowledge of what to do. And they are trying the best they can, because in China, if you don't work, you don't eat. There is no such thing as unemployment benefits. And we have people who have simply been left behind. In this aging society, there are folks who simply don't know where to go, and they don't have families with them either. Those aren't the real problems, though. If you want my thinking, these are the real problems. These are my kids. These are migrant school children in Shanghai. When you ask them, are you from Shanghai? They'll say, no, I'm not from Shanghai. Where are you from? They say, well, I'm from Anhui. Anhui is a province, maybe 4 hours to the west of Shanghai. And so you ask these kids, so have you been to Anhui recently? They said, no. Is any of your family in Anhui? No. Are you planning to go to Anhui? No. Are you Anhui? Yes. These are migrants who have not yet been integrated into Chinese society. And as we know, if you don't integrate people, you create a problem. You create a really long-term problem. Now, Shanghai, of course, is pretty good. As you can see, these kids, most of them are wearing some kind of uniforms here. So the city government, in fact, has made an effort to create schools and to create some pension plan to cover migrants. But that's the best that you have in China, and it's not that good. This is the Chinese challenge, is how do we bring hundreds of millions of people, hundreds of millions from the village to the city. That's what Chinese politicians deal with every day. That's why China is this amazing story of change. And you wonder, how can they keep it together? How do they manage? Well, so the short answer is sometimes they manage well, sometimes not. Here's an example. This is the city of Beijing. All of these dots, these are where the schools are and the hospitals. As you can see, most of these dots, they're in the middle. And Beijing is laid out with rings. So first ring, second ring, third ring, fourth ring. We're now out to the fifth ring, and there's going to be a sixth ring. And these are big rings. We're talking about 30, 40 kilometers. So all of the services are here in the middle. When you bring in migrants, what happens? Well, the schools, which are here, the dark is where the supply is, the people are out here. So the supply and the demand are not in the same place. So we have simply a mismatch. And if we look at how, so the darker here is better, that means people in the middle, they're getting a lot of service, they're getting schools, they're getting hospitals, they're getting parks. But all the people out here, they're not. And surprise, surprise, the people outside, those are the migrants. Those are the lower income people. That's a huge cost for China. That's the problem China is trying to address with urbanization, is saying, how do we integrate these people? How do we deliver services to them? And it's a real cost. If we look at China's economic performance, back in the early 2000s and before that, we could be reliably assured that every year China's economy would grow at 10, 11, 12, sometimes like 20%. Amazing. Now that number, and here's the dip in the recession, has gone all the way down to like 5 or 6%. So somehow we're not growing as fast as we used to. At the same time, we're still spending a lot of money. And this solid line, that's the credit line. So China is getting the same amount of money into the economy, but is getting less out of the economy. And that's because it's more difficult now. We have to do these things that we didn't have to do before. Now we have all these migrants. We have to find a way to bring them schools. Things are more expensive. So the Chinese economy needs a new model. All this is the thinking that China has been going to say, how do we make urbanization work now for China? How do we make it good urbanization? And this was the shift. In the past, urbanization, all about economic development. Faster is better. Try to make more jobs. Now, this questions of the environment, questions of social well-being, China has to find a new balance. That is what governance, of course, is finding a balance, making a decision that includes all of these different ideas. And so when we look at what government is saying, what we see is, yes, we still have one big target, this 7% GDP target. But now we have other targets. We have 7.4 million affordable housing. We have 60 million rural population getting drinking water. We have reductions in carbon dioxide emissions, new employment figures. So many more targets. It's just more complicated. So China starts to look, if you will, like a more normal economy, more like a developed economy. We shouldn't be surprised by this. And here's the Chinese new urbanization plan, what its targets are. So the coverage rate of basic medical insurance to be 98% of everybody in China should have some basic medical insurance. 60% of transport should be public transport in cities of over 1 million. 95% of urban households should have their sewage treated, their household waste. Broadband connections, over 50 megabytes per second. The share of green buildings and so forth. So the Chinese government's good at putting out some aspirations and some targets, but does it really work? Does it actually happen? What we see is that it varies a lot by city. China's government is good at big projects. So here we have the high-speed rail project. And high-speed rail has been going in China now for about 10 years, and it creates connections. And that means the small cities, you can live in a small city and work in a big city. So that's a kind of project that Chinese government is good at. Chinese government is also good at building things. So this is the Beijing metro system. So China today has over 50 metros under construction, each one of which has probably about 1,000 kilometers, 40 or 50,000 kilometers of track being built right now. It will probably connect about 100 million people by the time it's done. And if you have that problem where you have people outside the city and you have services inside the city, you need public transit. And this is all happening now. So we will see thousands of kilometers being laid in the next couple of years. China's also government is pretty good at a city level at building new things. This is a green eco-city, a model for it, outside of the city of Chengdu, which is intended to be a zero-carbon city. And you can see here, it's supposed to have farmland basically going right into the city, up and down. And all these are zero-carbon buildings. These cities are being funded by the Chinese government. They're being built largely by Chinese developers, but they're being designed by European and American architects and Japanese. So if you go to Chicago and you ask them about China, they're very happy because all these architects are basically able to live in Chicago and work in China, designing these kind of structures. What else is China doing? China is cleaning up the wind, cleaning up the energy. Top 10 largest renewable energy program in the world, largest wind program, largest solar program, largest nuclear program. So we'll see. But clearly China is trying to say, how do we improve the quality of what we do across the energy system? And here's another example from a city. Some of you might know Big Belly. It's a solar trash compactor. This is the Chinese version. It is a solar-powered trash can. It's a smart trash can. It has a Wi-Fi unit. It has a sensor. When you put your trash in, it will tell you, is this recyclable or not? You know, is this plastic or paper? And if it's recyclable, boop, the little thing opens up and you can put it in that. So little efforts right at the bottom, right at the city level, to make things better for everybody to become more sustainable. So those goals, they're happening, but also these projects and these technologies are starting to make life a bit better for everybody in the country. This is not just a China example. I came here from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. I said, why am I in Riyadh? Why would I be down there? Well, this is the answer. This is Riyadh in 1990. This is Riyadh today. You see, something happened. All of these people showed up, and you had the same thing happen. You had people show up, but no services. And as Riyadh is one of the largest and fastest growing cities in the world today. So what are we doing in Riyadh? Well, that's what we're doing. We have the world's largest metro program underway. So the stories, the things that we see in China today, I think we will start to see across the world, not just in China, but as I said, in Middle East, in India, in Africa, and even Latin America. So who's getting all this done? Is the government just waving a wand and making it happen? This is how I think about the Chinese government. Yes, you see, we have the emperor. He's right there. That's the emperor. And it's usually a he, sometimes a she, but usually an emperor. And then here we have the advisors. We have all the court around the emperor. But look at here. Who's this person? This is the person who is trying to get something done. This person is coming to the emperor and he's asking for, can you allow me to do this? And the emperor is asking his advisors, saying, is it a good idea or not? And there's a big, long conversation. But at the end of the day, this is the person who's getting things done. And that's the way China works. China has a government which allows for a sense of direction and a sense of we are Chinese, but doesn't tell you what to do. You, at the local level, Mr. Local Party Secretary or business person or mayor, you have to propose something to me. And then I'll tell you if it's a good idea or not. But it's your idea. That's the basic principle of Chinese government. And what's happening today is that instead of this being one person, or 10 people, or 100 people, what we have is hundreds of millions of people suggesting new ideas. This is a map of the QQ subscribers in China. Random point. It's a few years old. At any given, QQ is the Chinese one generation back equivalent of Twitter. At any point in China, there are 300 million people online with QQ. At 4 in the morning, there are 300 million people on QQ. I don't know what they're doing, but they are online. So that's Chinese democracy. It's a conversation that goes across the country instantaneously. What happens in Shenzhen is known in Xinjiang immediately. That's the nature of the dialogue. It's instantaneous, it's rapid fire, it demands a response. And without that response, this conversation cannot go on. And that's the life of the city in China. Yes, we still have the emperor. The emperor still has to say yes, but there is now so much dynamism that's coming from the bottom up that this becomes a much more different kind of conversation. I had a friend who used to be the US Federal Communications Commissioner, and he went to China after the earthquake in Sichuan, and he met with his colleagues in the Chinese State Administration of Radio and Film and Television, who was basically the Chinese censor. And so the Chinese censor looked at the Federal Communications Commission and said, well, you also must be a censor, so we feel comfortable, we can talk to each other, censor to censor. And so he asked themselves, well, what about this earthquake? Look what's all going on out there. How do you keep track of the news? And they said to him, it's very difficult for us. We now have to find a good way to spin the media. And he said, did I actually hear you? Did you say spin the media? Because in the past, we didn't spin the media, we just told the media what to say. It was very simple. But now, no, now we have to think about what's our strategy. How do we actually influence the public? How do we think about what the government is going to be able to say? Just a simple example, that this is much more complicated than it used to be. And no, it's not just people, of course. It's companies. These are the unicorns. These are the Chinese unicorns. Xiaomi, Didi Kuaishou, Lufax, DJI, even Uber China, which is his own listing. So we have huge dynamic Chinese companies now, which didn't exist 25 years ago. So it's the combination of an engaged population and a much more developed private sector, which is responsible for most of the growth of the Chinese economy, have made a very different kind of development for China. So finally, does this matter to the rest of the world? China's already the largest trading partner of many countries. The flags are the #1 trading partner for that country. You can see a lot of Chinese flags. China is already the most important relationship for most of the world. And if it isn't there for one country, it's going to get there pretty quickly. So yeah, it matters. But what does China bring? Is China helping? Well, it brings stuff. It brings cheap phones. You can buy a Chinese mobile phone for under 15 bucks in most African markets right now. Doesn't do much, but it does connect you. China will bring roads. China will build infrastructure across emerging markets. That's what the One Belt, One Road is all about. And if you don't want a road, China will build you an auditorium. The African Union's new auditorium. And if that isn't enough, okay, maybe you want development, fine. Well, we'll build you an industrial zone. And what if you just have hardware? You say, I need somebody to work in that industrial zone. Fine, we'll bring you a company. And if all of that isn't enough, well, okay, we'll just bring you the whole thing. We'll bring you a city. And so there are easily 40 or 50 Chinese cities being built across Africa and the Middle East and South Asia today, looking not unlike cities in China. Perhaps not surprisingly, because they're being built by the same people. So China is already part of this urbanization conversation around the world through its trade, but also through its investment and through its ideas. The idea of a Chinese city is a powerful idea. It says you can change your buildings and change yourself. So let me finish with one quote. Did anybody see this coming? Deng Xiaoping was an amazing, a remarkable man. He said many important things. This is perhaps my favorite quote. Some people in rural areas and cities should be allowed to get rich before others. Most of us know this. This is a very famous line. That wasn't the end of his comment. When some areas and people become rich, they are encouraged to help poor areas and people get rich so that all the people in the country will ultimately become rich and prosperous. That is the clearest statement of a national urban policy as I've ever heard. We have to allow for the inequalities to emerge, for some of us to get rich. But then we need to look around and realize that there has been a cost, and we need to make it better. We need to invest so that the whole society will become rich. That's the journey China's embarked on. That is the message of Chinese urbanization, and that's what I'm hopefully here to share with you today. So thank you very much.
Grazie. Jonathan, grazie, mettiamoci qua perché serve un po'. Grazie. E questo è il momento delle domande. Mi spiace, c'è un po' di distanza tra noi e voi, ma perché dovevamo stare più in luce per lo streaming, perché sapete che Media Guru comunque diffonde queste idee anche attraverso le lecture, attraverso lo streaming, e c'erano alcuni gruppi che ci stavano seguendo. È il momento per chiedere tutto quello che vogliamo chiedere. Grazie. Io intanto comincio a dire che mi è emersa un'immagine che in qualche modo mi sembra che emerga un'idea, un'immagine della Cina con questo tema dell'urbanizzazione e dei problemi che devono affrontare, come se da un certo punto di vista fosse un grande laboratorio, voglio usare questa definizione, che ci permette anche di, avendo loro già raggiunto dei livelli veramente problematici, no? Di inquinamento, problemi di integrazione, eccetera, adesso che si sta pensando e stanno cercando soluzioni, mi sembra un laboratorio veramente di ricerca più che di interessante per i suggerimenti che possono dare, no? Anche al resto del mondo. Comunque, sentiamo un attimo voi le vostre impressioni e le vostre domande. Prego, gira un microfono. Presentatevi.
Sì, I'm Sandro Rolla, and my question is what we can bring as a European or best Italian in China in this context that you show very well. As European, in particular as Italian, what we can bring there?
Cosa possiamo veramente fare o portare in Cina?
So, the question what can you bring to China? Well, I think, of course, you can bring technology. That was already the beginning of the idea that China had, was to open up to the outside world, so the outside world would bring technology that China could then use to improve its economy and its productivity. So there are many world-class Italian technologies, from airplanes to helicopters to fashion textiles. So I think that's one. But I think more than that, there is an experience of what it is like to live in an advanced society, in a society where you have to tolerate differences, where you have to find ways of resolving things without killing each other, and not to rely only on the government. Now, you may look around yourself and say, well, there's still some challenges here too. But believe me, that there is a lot to be learned and a lot to be transferred to a place like China, which simply doesn't have any of that context. 30 years ago, China didn't have any law. None. Had no lawyers, nothing. China today has very little finance regulation. China's just putting in a Food and Drug Administration. So there are lots of things that China can actually benefit and wants to learn. But I would not actually ask myself, what can I do for China? And I would also ask myself, what can China do for me? Why does it matter for me? What can I get out of it? And there I think that the example that China shows of let us try things that are new, the things that have not been written about in books. Let us explore this new opportunity that we have in the life of the city. I think that example, especially when it comes to embracing new people and new ideas, is a very positive example. And I think people who go and see China, they come back differently. They are different people. They have different ideas, and they have a different expectation for themselves as well as for China.
Prego.
Renzo Francabandera. One of the topics of our time is migrating, and we saw for many decades Chinese people going, for example, in Italy, where they started creating areas where they all live together, typically. I think that now also Italians are migrating to China somehow, but one of the worries people have is about the language barrier, and what are the hurdles that an immigrant to China has to solve. You went there many years ago when I suppose it was really difficult for you to integrate somehow. And is it easy to integrate, to find a job? If someone wants to come to China and change his life, What does he find?
It's a wonderful question because I think everybody can go. It's actually something that is mostly a matter of attitude. The Chinese people, as I said, it's the central kingdom. They expect people to come. They are comfortable with foreigners coming to China. There's a special place for them, of course, but there's an openness. So language, of course, it's I think the more you give, the more you get. So if one invests in understanding people's culture and atmosphere, then you can get more. But I know many successful business people who speak very, very little Chinese. They are good at understanding how to get along, how to understand the customer, or even journalists, I mean, who are good at finding ways of doing an interview without being perfect in the language. Maybe you work with interpreters, or maybe you simply find the people who you can communicate with. So the short answer is, I think it's actually very available, and that most of Chinese society is small business, it's small families, it's a very local environment, and so there will always be somebody you can talk to. It's mostly about showing up. So I tell people who, if you are interested in studying in China, go to China. That is the only way you'll learn.
Una domanda difficilissima, forse anche un po' sciocca. Quando la Cina smetterà di crescere e cosa succederà 30 anni dopo?
No, not at all superficial. I think I think it's a very fundamental question, and I think we kind of know. China's workforce has already stopped growing. There will be no new Chinese workers. It's done. That is the aging of the Chinese population. Now, there will still be growth in the population, probably for another maybe 15, 25 years, but then we're there. And so at that point, China then starts to demographically look a lot like any OECD country. That's the challenge China has, is that day is not that far away. And China is still not a very rich country. It's getting richer, but it's not at OECD level. So it has a long way to go before it can feel comfortable that it has saved enough and that it is productive enough to be able to have a harmonious society, as they would say, when they're also an older society. So I think we're getting there. The answer to your question is it's coming very soon, and I think that it will make a difference to how Chinese society looks at itself and what it expects of all of its citizens, both the old and the young.
Buonasera. Dal punto di vista dei diritti umani e della democrazia, e se non sbaglio hanno ancora un premio Nobel per la pace in carcere. Ci saranno dei progressi anche su questi fronti? Grazie.
So democracy and human rights. I mean, I'm sorry, the translation didn't come through, but I think I understand where you're going with this. I think the way I think about the question, and of course this is not a view from a political scientist or a demographer, this is beyond my professional expertise, but I would only look at the fact that governance and the changes that we have going on in China today, they have implications for governance. An older China, a more urban China, a more technological China, a more global China is a different China. And with the changes, we cannot expect the governance of China to be the same either. And we do see changes. We see mayors on the telephone and on television call-in shows responding to citizens. We see public officials apologizing and changing their decisions because people have said, I don't want that chemical factory to be built in my downtown. So I think that there is a movement towards a more decentralized, perhaps, but certainly a more responsive governance. Whether that means democracy and one person, one vote, that's another question. I find that today we have one way of running China, but that way cannot be the same in 10 years or 20 years. There will be changes.
10-20 anni non avremo sicuramente più le problematiche che abbiamo oggi, anche se è vero che in alcune aree della
Maria Grazia, abbiamo una domanda da Matera, dei nostri amici che ci seguono sempre. Dicono che sono rimasti particolarmente colpiti dalla capacità della Cina di essere piena di designer del cambiamento e dicono che a Matera hanno creato un festival sul design immateriale. Chiedono a Jonathan se ha qualche esempio di buone pratiche da segnalare sul design immateriale.
It's a wonderful question. I think that the Chinese best practices are the best of the best practices are the ones that emerge from the people themselves and their conversations. So that is where the best practices can be. I think the one thing I do like about the Chinese government process is that it is open to opinions. They have many expert panels. I imagine the US government asking the Chinese government, what is your opinion on our social security system? So maybe you could give us some advice on the financial regulator. That never happens in the US. But in China, that happens all the time. So lots of examples of how China looks outside China to understand and develop new ideas. But that's all reference. What really matters is ideas that are from China, that are for China, that can be implemented in China. And there, I think what we've seen is this social media explosion of this capacity to have this conversation and sometimes to say, okay, let's move on. We're finished with that. Let's do something else. But then to take those ideas and to put them into practice and to build new things quickly. So because China has Shenzhen, in Shenzhen you have this amazing tens of millions of engineers. So if you have an idea, you can make it right away. 5 times as fast to prototype in Shenzhen than anywhere else in the world for 50% of the cost. Well, I mean, that's a best practice. You can take your intangible design and you can make it real. That is the best, that is the idea. Now, only China maybe can do that for everything, but there are many things where people can do this in a specific area or for a type of technology or for a specific customer segment. So that notion that we try it and we fail and we try it and we fail and we try it and we fail until finally we succeed. That is what China's best practice is. China's best practice is relentless trying and relentless failure until finally you achieve success.
I'm Ivan Montis. I have a question about the geopolitical situation. We know there are some tension with some of the countries around China. And my question is, after the situation that we are experimenting now with Russia, we have to be worried about new tension in the future around China.
Yeah, China would say it lives in a bad neighborhood. You know, there's crazy people in the northeast. There's the Straits of Malacca. 80% of China's imports go through the Straits of Malacca for oil. They're worried about what if a bomb goes off there. And then we have the Uyghurs who occasionally do something in Beijing train stations. And so they feel the world is a threatening place. So I think that that doesn't excuse anything, but it does share their perspective. I think one shouldn't worry too much about the Chinese adventure as much as the ability that China and the world have to work together. So what can China bring to international issues, whether it's climate change or migration or poverty? There's so much opportunity China now has because, and this is new for China. It was after Aceh and the tsunami where the first time that Indonesia came to China and said, we need your help. Help us recover from the tsunami. And China said, what do you mean? We're a developing country. We don't have any money. And they said, no, you may be a developing country, but you have a lot of money. So think about what your obligation is to other developing countries. So that was a new thing for China. And of course, since then, we have now seen the BRICS Bank and the Silk Road Fund and so forth. So China is starting to come to the table. But there's still so much more that we need to have. We need to have more communication. We need to have a lot more dialogue. This is not something that we've seen a lot of. And yet it's necessary. So I think I don't think there is a necessary conflict, but I think there must be more actions to build cooperation. And if we do not have more actions, then we will not have an understanding. And then yes, sometimes bad things will happen. Mistakes will happen. And then we will have a problem. So if we want to avoid the problem, the best answer is to start cooperating now.
Ancora una domanda, poi rompiamo le righe e ci troviamo con l'after meet qui accanto per poter continuare a parlare e a dialogare insieme. C'è ancora una domanda? Sì, prego.
Buonasera, sono Tiziano Cattaneo. Volevo chiedere, di fatto sono 3 domande ma che poi si può racchiudere in una. Circa 2 anni fa il presidente Xi Jinping ha annunciato la One Belt, One Road, che è composta da queste 2 linee di terra e di mare. La domanda è: cosa si sta veramente facendo in questo contesto della One Belt, One Road? Sicuramente l'Europa e l'Italia, che è un po' il segmento di congiunzione tra la linea di terra e la linea di mare, quale ruolo può svolgere in questo contesto? E osservando la mappa, è la terza cosa, osservando la mappa appunto della One Belt, One Road è esclusa l'America. Volevo sapere una sua opinione di questo contesto.
One Belt, One Road is absolutely a new policy. It is the legacy of the President Xi Jinping. He has devoted a lot of his personal effort to this. And what they are after is this idea that China will grow as the markets around China will grow. So they are interested in the economic development of the markets for Chinese companies. And that's about it. China believes in a common market based around the opportunities for the development of the Chinese economy. So in that sense, what are they after? They're after what any rising capitalist power is after. They're after growth in marketplace. They're after opportunities to develop good distribution, to obtain technology, to uplift the quality of the economies where they operate. And if we look at what they're spending the money on, it's on infrastructure, and it's on industrial development, and it's on all those things, those pictures that I was showing. So that's what they're after, is the development of those economies, but based on the opportunities for the Chinese economy. So it's very clear. Now, that doesn't mean that other companies and other countries can't participate. And in fact, China is very open to 3-way deals, if you will, sort of work with other companies together in these geographies. But somebody has to do the work. Somebody has to show up. And so to your question of why not the Americas, well, I think that, again, goes beyond my understanding of politics. But I think that there's obviously some issue between the Chinese drawing a line across the Panama Canal into southern South America that might possibly get people upset in Washington. So avoiding that is also a priority. When Morales, the president of Colombia, the past came to China and said, we want a special relationship with China. And then the Chinese looked at him and says, you should really think about who your special relationship should be with. We think our special relationship is with the United States. Possibly yours should also. So I think that the Chinese government is also very clear that it wants to avoid conflicts, and it wants to create, again, an integrated economy, but one which benefits China, but one which also benefits all the parties in the world.
Grazie. Allora, un grande applauso. Ringrazio Jonathan per questa interessantissima overview. Abbiamo portato una riflessione con Future Ways of Living, uno sguardo sulla Cina, una Cina vista da un'angolazione molto ma molto diversa, un gran continente. Vi invito all'appuntamento del 18 in triennale per questo incontro con Ari e Banzi e la neopreistoria. la mostra Neopreistoria, e adesso siete invitati a raggiungerci qua e passiamo almeno una mezz'ora insieme con un piccolo after meet. Grazie per la partecipazione, grazie alla Triennale e a Base per averci ospitato, e a Jonathan perché è il secondo appuntamento sulla Cina ed è straordinario, terremo d'occhio questa storia. A presto, grazie.